Well, good afternoon, and on behalf of Bryan Memorial Gallery, I'm so pleased to come to this moment of the beginning of the 30th anniversary of the gallery, which we're celebrating today with 3 exhibitions in the studio with Mary Bryan in this room, work by Marian Steele, her good friend and painting partner in the middle room, and the 2014 legacy collection of artwork of people who are members of Bryan Memorial Gallery, and also some well-chosen work from the families of some artists who are deceased. I want to say up front, and you can probably say it with me, it takes a village. And there are several different segments of that village, starting with an extraordinary outpouring of sponsorship that has come to us this year for this exhibition. And that comes from Jack Corse of Jack Corse Fuel, who we promised that if he would be a sponsor, we would have a belly dancer at the opening. And he agreed to be a sponsor, and then he went away on vacation. Whether the two are related, I'm not sure. But, we also are so thrilled to have sponsorship from GW Tatro, and thanks very especially to Greg Tatro for that sponsorship. Artisan Realty will be represented later today by David Raphael, and I believe this is the 4th time that Artisan Realty has sponsored an exhibit at Bryan Memorial Gallery, so we're especially grateful for that. Union Bank is represented by our board president, and how many times has this happened? At least 4 and maybe more have we had the sponsorship of Union Bank, our neighbors down the street, and Susan Lassiter is representing them. We also have to thank Vermont Arts Council and Vermont Community Foundation for being with us through all of our initiatives and operations. So we're very grateful for that. The second segment, whom I have to thank, is the incredible team of volunteers who helped us put this together. And that includes our A-team, the installation team of Anna Bremen, Susheta Prabhu, Barb Bertacci, Longina Smolinski, Laurel Hammond, all under the leadership of our assistant director, Jim Galuggi, such a significant contributor on issues of conservation, which when putting these kinds of shows together become enormous issues. And Jim is our go-to person on that. FIONA Cooper-Fenwick, who is on the panel today, is co-curator of the show. She's the exhibitions chair. She's on the board of Bryan Memorial Gallery, and she is one of the artists in the Legacy Collection. So she wears 4 hats today, and she basically framed this entire show. So you can just count the number of pieces of art on the wall, and you get an idea of the measure of her dedication. We are thrilled to have the Bryan family with us today. Alden Bryan, son of Mary and Alden Bryan. BECKNER Bryan, grandson of Mary and Alden Bryan.
She was a true artist in the sense that she was like a sponge. You would look around her.
And if we can persuade her, we may even hear a few words from Phoebe Bryan, daughter-in-law of Mary and Alden Bryan.
It wasn't sort of a social dilettante type thing. It was that she loved animals and knew all about them. And I think you frequently see that in some of her paintings. I'm unabashedly prejudiced when it comes to this woman, and there's no question. The only time where maybe I wondered about her sanity was her great love of little yappy dogs with French names. I don't have one up here, for which I'm grateful.
And finally, our new best friend. Chad is the grandson of Marian Steele. We've gotten to know him over the last 6 months, and it has been such a pleasure and so illuminating to have him introduce us to the full measure of his grandmother's work. The portrait on the wall, which is many of you are very familiar with, was painted posthumously by Marian Steele of Mary Bryan. And it's been on several walls, and it's been upstairs in the office, and now today it is front row center, looking over us. Mary and Marian were best friends and painting partners, and therein lies some tales. So, are we ready to get started? So I'd like to start by asking Fiona, if you will tell us a little bit about what went into making this exhibition.
Okay. Well, its inception was probably a year and a half to 2 years ago, when we were putting together the schedule. And for the last year, 9 months to a year, we've been working on this specific show. And it started with a conversation, actually, between Mickey and ALDEN and myself, in which we got to know a little bit more about Mary via ALDEN's, what ALDEN had to say about his mom and what he knew of her as an artist, and sort of getting a feel for who she was. And that then led into sort of what were we thinking about for the show, and then we started going through the vault, which is hundreds and hundreds of paintings in flat file boxes, and taking each box out and just literally looking at each piece and trying to put together a view. It sort of reveals itself over time. The more you look at it, the more you get another piece of Mary. So you sort of see how it kind of comes together on its own. And each box was just, it was just like opening a Christmas present. You just didn't know what was going to be inside. It was everything from sketches to sketchbooks to paintings on both sides of paper, and like which one do you choose, and it was just a wonderful journey of Mary's life through artwork. And that took us through December. It was probably 8 or 9 days we met, going through the vault. And we also reviewed her permanent collection as well. I needed to do that just to get a view of sort of what the gallery had to represent Mary, what they had chosen to represent Mary in the permanent collection, so we could work off of that. So by December, we pretty much had all the pieces chosen. It's over 100 pieces, and then comes the building the show. We have the pieces, we have to figure out the framing, we have to figure out sizes. Being on a budget, we wanted to work with things that we had. So framing, matching frames with pieces that already, that would fit in the frames was a lot of trading out, which was, a joy in itself. Trying to figure that all out and going through the vault and measuring and, within a quarter of an inch and all that. And then Jim ordered numerous frames for us. And we determined sizes, and then he ordered the frames. We got mats all cut to size and brought here, and then we started cutting mats and putting frames together. And Eric Tobin also contributed in putting together a great many of the larger frames, like the one on that wall. So I think pretty much everything was either rematted or framed for the first time. And in January, I sort of had a mini panic attack. How is this going to happen? How is this going to happen? And it just takes time, and volunteers came in, and we had a day where people just, helped put things together. And I would sit over there and cut mats, and because each one had to be measured individually. So that's really the process of it coming together. And here we are.
Alden, would you introduce us to your mother?
She was born in Carlsbad, New Mexico, a long way from the ocean, and grew up in various places. Her folks were moved around a bit. On the East Coast, sometime later in her life, she was on the West Coast for a while. But from the very beginning, she wanted to make things, particularly sculpture. She started out as a sculptress, and I don't know just who she studied with. Do you remember, Mickey, who that was? Or?
Yes. It's on the wall.
Somebody, I think, fairly well known.
Yes, she was most known for minting, for coins, for special occasions, for centennials.
Metals. Because your mother did a lot of metals.
Yes, yes, medals.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get the name.
But in any event, all she really wanted to do was make things. Her whole life, she was happiest in her studio. And as she got older and got into painting, she started first, I think, with oil, then watercolor. And as you look around the work that was done in the late 30s and early 40s, it's more traditional, watercolor and oil. But then she sort of left oil and took up watercolor, and studied with Elliot O'Hara in Algonquin, Maine. I remember as a little boy, she went up and spent a couple of weeks, and either once or twice for 1 or 2 summers at some of his workshops. And who was she really as a person? If you take a look at the painting up there, that's about as good a likeness as I think you're likely to see. It brings out her personality very well. And of course, Marian and Steele knew my mother so well. They were good friends. I don't know how much they painted together, but I know that they were together on art-related matters a lot. They didn't live that far from each other in Gloucester, where we went during the summers. My mother and father had a gallery on Rocky Neck, and that's where they sold their work. And Marian lived, probably 4 or 5 miles away, over by Good Harbor Beach, if any of you know that area of Gloucester, fairly near the shore. Do you remember the house? You probably know the house.
Yes,
right?
it's right on the private side of Good Harbor Beach, overlooking Salt Island.
Yeah. And so they saw quite a bit of each other. And so when Marian was asked by my father to do a portrait after my mother died, she died in 1978 in September, he had a number of photographs that he gave her, but she could do a painting of that caliber because she knew my mother so well, and really, I think, got a lot of her personality in that painting. My mother was not a boisterous type. She was quiet. She was very sweet, and I don't think she ever insulted anybody in her life. She was just one of those very gentle, nice people. And her idea of a good day was to spend it in the studio. And almost everything you see here was created in the studio, either from sketches or from memory or whatever. So that's just a thumbnail sketch of her life. She didn't go to college. She didn't study at an academic institution of any kind. She was, I won't say self-taught, but she certainly developed on her own. And she knew a lot of artists. And Genevieve Wilhelm was one of her close friends. They did paint on the landscape quite a bit. So that's about the basics of it.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you the same question. Chad, would you introduce us to your grandmother?
Yes, no problem. Let's see, Marian William Steele was born in 1912 in Trenton, New Jersey. Her father was a pretty accomplished musician who was a Welshman, hence the Williams part of her name. And he believed in hard work. He felt that in order to become an accomplished artist of any kind, you had to hone your skill. So, of course, all my grandmother wanted to do as a young child was paint all the time. And her father basically forced her to go to school. As far as her schooling, she started at the Trenton School of Industrial Arts in Trenton, and later the prestigious Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia, which we think still exists. And when she graduated, she won a scholarship called the Crescent Memorial Scholarship, which allowed her to go to Europe right after school for an extensive period of time, all expenses paid. And a lot of her juvenilia are wonderful sketches and paintings from all over Italy and Greece and France. And I think that influenced her quite a bit as far as wanting to become a landscape painter of some renown. After returning from Europe, she began studying and painting by invitation at the Albert C. Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, which, according to Nikki, puts her among a rare group of people. Puts her among a rare group of artists. So I think unlike Mary, Marian kind of did it the old-fashioned way, where she, was forced to, she would tell me stories about, when she was in school. In order to pass an art class, a particular class, she would have to draw every single bone in the human body by memory with a charcoal pen. And so I think you can see in her portraiture, whether it's people or even animals, the grasp that she has of the anatomy. And it really comes out, I think, in her portraiture. So when she was in her 20s, she moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. She married young, like most people did back then, to my grandfather, who at the time owned a hotel which they lived in Cambridge. And they were divorced within about 10 years, which I think really influenced my grandmother. She was really hurt by that, and I think caused her to become a bit of a recluse for about the next 40 or so years. She never got remarried again. She moved up to, she and my grandfather's summer home, which was on Good Harbor Beach in Gloucester, and lived there all by herself for the next 40 or so, even 50 years, until she became, too ill to maintain the house, because it was a very big house. It's up on a cliff overlooking the raging ocean, and it's a really inspiring place to be. I used to go up there and spend weekends with her, and she used to tell me how much she loved the salt air, even though I didn't really understand what she was talking about. But the salt, I guess you'd say the smell of the ocean, she loved. She loved listening to the ocean at night, and it would lull her to sleep, and me as well. I usually slept in the same bed with her when I went up there. And she, like Mary, was just never had a bad day in her life. She just was the happiest person you ever knew, and just absolutely loved painting. She did a little sculpture too, but I think really her loves were oil painting, and then later, just like Mary, watercolor, which is, I think, in many ways a more difficult medium to work in. And so, so just a couple more things. She became a pretty accomplished portrait artist to the point where there was always a line of people that wanted to have their portrait done by her. And eventually word got around in, not only the upper classes, but celebrities found out about her, and even some professional athletes. And she's painted the likes of Muhammad Ali. She did Mario Andretti, the race car driver. And she also did Joe Namath back when he was relevant. Some of you might remember Joe Namath before he was wearing a fur coat during the Super Bowl. But so anyway, during the height of her career, she was an esteemed member of many art associations that you guys might have heard of: the Guild of Boston Artists, the California Art Association, the Rockport Art Association, the Cambridge Art Association, and the American Association of Professional Artists. She had many successful shows throughout her career at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, the Sal Magundi Club on Fifth Avenue in New York City, the Los Angeles Museum of Art, the American Artists Professional League, and Harvard University. And I would just like to end by saying that when she died, she only had 2 children, and they both had sort of interesting relationships with her art. And one of them really just wanted to hold on to it, my aunt, and sort of keep it away from the outside world and protect it. And my father just sort of didn't want anything to do with it. So I didn't think that was right. I think that was fair to her. And so when I found out about the Bryan Gallery, I got in touch with Jim Gallucci, and this seemed like the perfect place to bring her art out from where it's been. And the stuff that you see in the middle room is just a handful of stuff that we took out from storage that was directly from her own private studio in Gloucester and her own little gallery that she had in the basement. So that's pretty much it for now.
And you're saying that, you said to me a little while ago, this is the first time in 30 years that this work has been seen.
By anybody, even family members. Yeah, yeah.
It's been in storage.
In cobwebs, in mothballs, let's say.
In mothballs. Oh, there's that word, mothballs.
How did you get your aunt to let you?
Well, my aunt and my father divided the paintings, and so these are in my father's side of the family, the ones you'll see.
BECKNER, what is your recollection of your grandmother, and what was it like to grow up surrounded by her work?
I was born in '68. My first memory of her is her walking with a walker. I never remember her at all under her own power. And basically my memories of her is just like what my father mentions, her just doing her own thing in her own studio. When I was a kid, we came out for holidays to the farm. She, she was always coming from the back room, so to speak. But with her work and growing up and just as the youngest Bryan and knowing Alden much longer than Buddy, because she passed away in '76.
No, 78.
78, because I thought your mother passed away in '78.
2001, so.
84.
84, that's right, okay, so.
But you were 10 years old with
Yeah,
Marian.
but with Buddy, with my recollection, she kind of slowed down doing her artwork in her latter years.
Yeah, she got ill in 72.
Yeah.
So you were only 4 years old when she
Right.
became ill. So
But
she
just
was-
knowing Alden and talking to Alden for all those years and coming out to the farm when he built this place, and he saw the value in me when I could start to drive and lug things. So just hearing him speak about Buddy is basically my knowledge of her. But you look at her as an artist. Back in those days, growing up, for her, it was interesting to hear Alden talk about how there's certain ways in society that women were kind of steered down for paths and roads, and to have a woman who at those years really know what she wanted to do and do it and follow through with it. You look at all her paintings in here, and this really is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. But anything she set out to do, she did 100%. She did to the fullest. She's been compared to a lot of historical great artists, Picasso being one of them. And you look at her watercolors, her sculpture, the horse heads out here, out front of the old Windsor Gin next door. She made the molds and she casted the metal for those heads. She made those. There's nothing that she couldn't do once she set her mind to it. I think my greatest memory of the work that she did, and a lot of it was Alden's influence in terms of his memory and his love of her work, but was how she could take 3 or 4 different mediums, I guess if that's the right word, and incorporate them into one painting. Probably one of my favorite paintings of hers, which nobody in this room has seen, is one that my parents have in their house. And I don't know the title of it. It's The Cat.
Oh, yeah, the Feline Fantasy.
Yeah, Feline Fantasy.
Yeah,
And
Mickey has seen it. Mickey has seen it.
that right there just explains her imagination, what she dreamt of, what she thought of, what she wanted to set out to do. She worked at it until she got it to where she wanted. Up at the home farm, we have books upon books upon books of sketchbooks where you could see she would doodle this, she would doodle that, and all her travels with Alden and places that she went as a younger woman. And you could see how she would just work on something, work on something, work on something, but she always had 3 or 4 or 5, you know, it seemed like 100 different things going on while she was trying to work on one specific thing. She was always working on other things. And she, you know, I guess back then, the world was a much bigger place compared to today. You see today people are specialized. They're, you know, when they set out there, you know, they just do watercolors or oils, or they dabble in certain things. You have your sculptures, but she did everything. She was a true artist in the sense that she was like a sponge. She would look around her environment, and she could, in her own mind, say if she wanted to do some. Where's Jim? The paddle painting, Jim? Is that the blade, the paddles? Yep, paddle knife painting, to just so many different things that she did. It's just remarkable that an artist over a lifetime can be so accomplished in so many different realms. So that's my memory. And obviously of her as a little boy, it was basically just standing beside her when she was in her wheelchair or in her walker, or helping her into the house, or down in Chatham where she spent her last years on the Cape. You know, it was just listening to her and just her very kind, soft voice. But by what I know about her is what I've seen growing up, and not only my parents' house, but my grandfather and his stories of her, and also what you'll see here today. And this is just, like I said, just a fraction of the things that she did. It doesn't really show the wide span of the true artist in her. But she was remarkable. You look around this room and it's just magnificent. Just magnificent.
A couple of things I'll add that I forgot. She did show her work quite widely. And as to prizes, she won 2 prizes at the American Watercolor Society. She was a full member there. 3 awards at the National Association of Women Artists. 2, one I think was it a gold medal at the Silver Mine?
Yes.
And 3 prizes at the North Shore Arts Association in Gloucester, and 2 at the Allied Artists of America, and including a gold medal of honor for the best in show. So she did a show at major galleries.
What was the Lonely House? What that award?
Oh, that was
one of the most prestigious awards I think she had.
Well, that was the first award she won, and it's that one right there. You can see it. That was her first, and we have that up at the house, I think. And that was the first prize she won, and I don't know where that was. It may have been
Gould.
Yeah, it's on the Gould lot, but I don't know where the prize was won. It probably was North Shore Arts Association, I would think. That would be most likely.
Her teacher was Laura Frazier.
Yeah.
And if you look up Laura Frazier, there is a really fascinating story. And I'll say no more, just Google the name Laura Frazier. But this sort of leads me to say, can I prevail upon you for a few comments, Phoebe? I know you spent endless hours with her. Can you talk a little bit about her spirit?
Yes, that's easy to do. I met her when she was in her mid-50s. Instant friendship. And of course, her art is what's important, but that makes it pretty one-dimensional. She was multifaceted. Picking up on a couple of things, one Beckner said about the diversity in her work. She was a professional knitter. She knit suits and cocktail dresses for a boutique in Florida. Beautiful. I mean, she would knit sweaters for her son, and she would do that sort of thing. She did exquisite crewel work. She did all kinds of things using her hands. That's what she loved. You can tell from that portrait, she had beautiful hands, long fingers, long fingernails. Always wore rings. And years after she died, I came across a band on a sink in her studio. that she undoubtedly wore when she was throwing a pot. It was completely encrusted in clay. I had no idea what it was, but I, knowing she liked rings, decided to soak it for a while. It was a lovely band of sapphires, but it was, you know, it was all included in clay. But that was her appearance. She was a beauty. Alden once said she resembled, or Madeline Carroll resembled Mary. Madeline Carroll was a movie star long before I saw her, so every time I see on the, you know, the TV guide or whatever that she's in a movie, I try to catch it because I want to see the resemblance. I think Mary was lovelier. Interesting, I was going to say, if I slip and call her Buddy, and as BECKNER did, it's B-U-T-T-Y. Her father gave her that nickname when she was a very little girl, and it stuck in the family, so we, you know, usually refer to her as Buddy. But at any rate, she laughed all the time. She, at least when we were together, we were silly at times. I remember once being at Jenny Wilhelm's late afternoon, and we all laughed so hard, tears literally came down our cheeks. Same with Marian Steele on occasions. She had a delightful sense of humor. I suspect the Alden men didn't really appreciate our sense of humor, so they perhaps didn't see it. But at times once we were out for lunch in Florida, and I finally said, I think we better quiet down because people were turning around and looking at us. And she was quiet, yes, but you'd get her with a bunch of people and we could be raucous. She had almost a childlike delight in certain things. When I first met her, I guess it was before we were married, and we'd come up for a vacation, Alden and I had come up for a vacation or a weekend maybe. And I just happened to mention that, do some of you remember scarab jewelry that was terribly popular? And I remember a lot of my friends had scarab circle pins. And I just mentioned I didn't have one. I didn't really care, but I just mentioned it. And the four of us went into Burlington for some shopping and dinner. And Mary went off on some errand, and then the three of us met for a cup of coffee later. And she had a big purse, and with absolute glee, she reached in and she said, and I guess she had been to Preston's and had picked up some stuff that she had stored there. And she said, see, I have a circle pin. And it was this one. Now, if you remember scarab pins and compare it with this, I sort of gasped. oh, that's lovely. So years and years later, when I got it, tears in my eyes, because I remember that this beatific and almost childish glee that she too had a circle pin. But she was like that. What I remember, and would have others remember, well, she felt it, being surrounded by so many family members who had degrees, advanced academic degrees. And she, I don't like to use the word smarted, but she did sort of smart, and she didn't. She was one of the most knowledgeable women people I ever knew. She was a voracious reader. And following from what BECKNER said, if she wanted to learn about something, there was no stopping her. She would have stacks of books on the subject. What she would have done with Google, I don't know. She may never have picked up another pen or paper in her life. She loved animals. She loved natural history. I remember one evening she started talking to me about P-U-Z, so that's what I want to say. Animals, and I didn't even know what it was. But they're animals that come out at twilight. But she was reading all about it and was fascinated. She came by her interest in animals, I guess, honestly, her father once brought her a bear. I suspect her mother didn't care for that. And I don't know how long the bear stayed around, but this was her pet. She was an accomplished equestrian when she was a young woman. But it wasn't sort of a social dilettante type thing. It was that she loved animals and knew all about them. And I think you frequently see that in some of her paintings. I'm unabashedly prejudiced when it comes to this woman, and there's no question. The only time where maybe I wondered about her sanity was her great love of little yappy dogs with French names. That made it worse. Apart from that, and there are too many of her paintings we don't have one up here, for which I'm grateful, because there are a lot of paintings of poodles, because she just loved poodles.
We have them on trash cans in our house.
They're what?
On the waste baskets in the bathrooms. She
put them anywhere she could get by with them. But that was her only flaw, as far as I'm concerned. She, as I say, loved to read. She loved to talk about Steinbeck. I tried to find her every Zane Grey novel. Now you can find them; they're all in reprint. When I was looking for, they were hard to find. But that's just a smattering. She always was reading. She was knowledgeable, as I say. She was in a way more intellectual than a lot of my friends who have advanced degrees. Just before she died, let's say 2 years before, she decided to take up weaving. This was not just to get a little loom. She wanted to start from scratch. So she had me get her raw wool and ship it to her in Chatham. And that was interesting, packing this huge box of this smelly stuff just right off the sheet. But she was going to, wash it, when you do, card it, spin it. She had her loom. She had books stacked beside her. That's a pretty big project, no matter how old you are. And here she wasn't bedridden entirely, but she was close to it. But she had all of this planned. We had a brilliant idea how to make some money. We were going, because she had to wash all the wool. So what do you do with the water that's left over? So we decided we were going to put it in jars and label it, what was it, steak and potatoes for your houseplants. Because apparently the lanolin is very good for houseplants. And that sort of fizzled out. We decided to do that. But I mean, she was zany. She was crazy. She had this wonderful, and she, back to the book, she would read cookbooks. She was a wonderful cook, and very experimental. In other words, she was not, this is blasphemous. I can't say she was not just an artist. She was more than an artist, we'll say that. She was a very vibrant person, albeit quiet, as her son remembers her. Only time I ever saw her annoyed, and I'll finish with this. We were at a party, house party, and a gentleman, and I was standing talking with her, and a gentleman came up and said, "I understand you do a little painting." And I stopped and looked at Mary. And he said, "Well, that's a nice hobby for a woman." I froze, she smiled, and I never saw her the rest of the evening. She was so angry with that sort of attitude that was the only time I ever saw that. But I wouldn't have wanted to cross her either. She was not just this insipid, sweet thing. She was strong and had strong opinions, but also had enough sense sometimes to keep them to herself. She didn't have a quiet, unassuming husband, and so sometimes it was just easier not to voice an opinion. But she was a strong woman. As I think you can see when she lives here, it was more than just a nice hobby, and she lived life with exuberance.
Chad, I know you have some really special recollections of your grandmother at her easel, and would you like to share some of those?
Well, yeah, unlike with BECKNER, I actually spent a lot of time with her because she had my father when she was quite young, and then later had my aunt, and my father ended up having 3 boys, and my aunt had a girl and 2 boys. And she was one of the most loving people I ever knew, and she just doted on her kids and her grandkids. And I remember every Christmas, all the grandkids would receive paint sets and pastels and like the finest charcoals and you know, materials to paint and sketch on. And she never pushed us. She never said, you know, you need to do this, but you know, it was a sort of not so subtle nudge that you should be painting. So we all painted. I mean, we tried anyway. I mean, it was, you know, real tough footsteps to follow in, I'd say, but I actually got to know her pretty well and how she painted and her style and her techniques. And some of them are interesting. I don't know what other artists do, but I do know that my grandmother preferred to be out in nature. She preferred to be outdoors, and you'll see she does a lot of beach scenes. She became pretty well known as a marine painter, I guess you could say. You know, countless images of Gloucester Harbor and Rockport and Good Harbor Beach and the islands, and children on the beach.
Some of those children are you,
Yeah,
are they not?
there was one in the other room that's me, yeah, for sure. There was a lot of embarrassing ones of me too, I have to say. But so she would always prefer to start outdoors, but of course it doesn't always work out that way if you're doing a huge one. So she oftentimes would take photographs of the place to remind her of it. And then she would oftentimes finish in her studio off the photographs. She also showed me about color. You know, she taught me that all the colors in the universe come from about, you know, 7 or 8 colors. And she would show me, she never bought special colors, she always mixed them herself. And she would show me, you know, how to make, you know, ochre and burnt sienna and, you know, all the hues in between. And it was pretty fascinating to learn all that. And so, but unlike Mary, you know, she wasn't a Renaissance woman. I mean, she could barely spell. She didn't do a lot of reading. I mean, she went to art school. She went to, you know, a couple of really good art schools, and you know, didn't do much else. And so she really just painted and painted and painted and painted. And what you'll see in the other room is just a sampling of some of the stuff that she did. But she did find. She once told me that I asked her why she had so many self-portraits, and she would never say this, but she was drop dead gorgeous, for one thing. But she told me once that if she did a self-portrait, she didn't have to worry about someone else's schedule. She didn't have to work around someone else's schedule. So you actually see a couple self-portraits in there that are pretty neat. Yeah, I also remember that she would never attempt a large canvas without first doing a small charcoal sketch of it first. And oftentimes a really detailed one that some of them are stunning in and of themselves. But she would never just, you know, put paint on a canvas without having rehearsed it in small size first. So those are the things that I remember about her.
I'm going to telescope a couple of the questions that we were thinking about in asking Alden and BECKNER and Chad if you would say what you hope people take away from these exhibits about Mary and Marian, from what is here. What would it please you now in basically 36 years after Mary's death, and how many
Marian died in 2001.
2001, so 13 years after her death. How do you hope that these legacies, if you don't mind my use of the word, move into the future? Alden, can you get us through that?
Well, that's hard to say. I'm not sure that I'm the person that should be talking to that.
It's okay, we'll excuse you.
You know, I grew up in a family of 2 artists, and that's enough for one family. I regret now that I didn't pay more attention to them both as artists when I was a kid. I wanted to get around outboards and boats and all those kind of things, and sailboats, and I was heading for the docks every day, and they were tied up in their artwork and their studios and out on the landscape and doing things like that. And My father spent a lot of time working, whenever they would put up shows at Rockport or Gloucester, he would help out. And so it's hard for me to kind of say what I would hope the public would take from it. But I will point out a few things as you look around the room. And I don't think I ever knew an artist with such a diversity of approach to various subjects. She literally could come off the beach with a bag full or box full of driftwood and so forth, and put together a collage or a number of things just out of a box of stuff that she picked up. Her imagination was almost limitless when it came to artwork. There's a catalog over there, and if you turn to page 13 of it, you'll see the horses at St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice. And I was telling Bill Lockwood about this. Have any of you ever actually seen those horses at St. Mark's? You actually see, there's 4 big horses across the stuff there. And that's the usual photo you see of them. But I don't know whether you can see this. This is from behind the horses, looking out from inside the cathedral. It's looking out over the horses' heads. And take a look at it, because it's kind of unusual, because this is entirely made up from her imagination. She had seen those horses. She knew what they looked like, and she had studied them. But you can't stand there and see that scene.
Unless you're a pigeon.
Yeah, pigeons like to fly by. You would have to be hung on either on a high scaffold or hung from a wire to actually see that. And that's the kind of person she was. She'd see a scene, but she wanted to see it. She wanted to imagine it as if it were some other perspective. And there's almost, Phoebe spoke to her a bit about that, her limitless imagination when it came to her artwork, which in some ways came from practice too. You see all these little paintings here? Well, the gallery was across the street from where we lived in Rocky Neck. And one of the things that she had was a table, and it had, any of you know Gordon Grant? Anybody ever heard of that name? Well, Gordon Grant made up a sign for her. His studio was right next door. And he made up a sign, and it's in watercolor, done by a pencil, a brush and watercolor. Original watercolors, $2.50. And a watercolor like that was a little larger, and that would cost, I think, was $5.25 or $5.50. And they were in mats, and they were on the table, and you could go through them. And she made them by the hundreds, and they sold by the hundreds. I've walked into a house of relative strangers to me and seen her small pictures on the wall. And over the years, in the 40s and maybe early 50s, she must have done at least hundreds of those, and she liked to do them. Now, she didn't go out on the landscape and paint those. She had sketchbooks maybe, wherever we went. Isle of Shoals was painting down there at the very end, the lighthouse. If I'm not mistaken, that's White Island Light. Now, we used to go there by boat on weekends, often with good friends who had a ketch. We'd spend, when I was a little boy, we'd spend the weekend, and she would sketch all around. She'd look from the boat, she would sketch all the different things she could see from the island, of which that would be one. But she saw scenes all like this up and down the East Coast, because we spent time on the East Coast in Maine. And she would come back with her head full of that, and then she would sit at her in her studio, and she would make up those things by the hundreds. Now, you get a lot of practice doing that. And then, of course, she probably got sick of it and wanted to kind of branch out and approach it from another angle, and then you see all of these different approaches. And she and my father took a trip to Alaska, and she came back after seeing those mountains that come right down to the water. I don't think we have any Alaska pictures here, but she came up with a kind of a style, which the centerpiece is here, quite abstract, and she did a lot of work along those lines. So it just seemed, as her life progressed, she came upon one form of painting to another, really all on her own. I never heard her discuss that she wanted to be of any particular school, but she just, as life went along, she just kept trying new things. So if you take anything from her paintings, I would guess is think of the diversity, her ability to create a mood, the picture down at the end there, the base of New York, Staten Island Ferry, that's one of my very favorite. I really have never seen that before, and I'm really struck by it, and I don't know whether she ever saw that scene. Maybe she saw it from the Staten Island Ferry, but I bet that she put that together in her studio from what she tried to get the mood. The one over there, the people in the rain, umbrellas in the rain. See the mood in that? She was good at creating an atmosphere, a mood, catching what the essence of what she saw was there. She didn't paint it as a reproduction of the scene, so much as to get the mood out of the scene. So that's the kind of thing I think I could suggest to you to think about.
Beckner, you want to add anything?
Took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay.
No, I just, you only, as far as we know, we only have one life to live, and that's all we remember. But, to be able to use your imagination with the world around you that you're surrounded by and actually observe and appreciate. And that's what she did. I mean, she really just appreciated the world she lived in and what surrounded her. And she went about her way to use her own imagination to just put it down on paper. You'll see this room really shows a wide spectrum of what she was capable of doing, but it's only, I would say, maybe a quarter of what she accomplished. But just her imagination of the world around her. She was observant, and my generation is so unobservant. We just want to wake up in the morning and just blow right through the day. And her days were 48 hours long. And she really appreciated her world that she lived in.
She sold a mountain of work. It was unbelievable the amount of work that went out of that gallery. And there's a lot of her work that hasn't come on the market, I think, just because people keep it. She was very prolific that way, because she spent literally, that's what she did. Her whole life was make things. Paint.
There's something of hers on eBay right now.
There is one now. Yeah, we see Cecilia work once in a while, mostly the smaller work.
They're the most precious, though, in a way. Just because of her detailed stuff. I mean, no matter if you stand up close or you stand far away, just the crispness of a lot of her work.
Chad?
I think a lot of the same things can be said for Marian, actually. I think that they were kindred spirits in a way, not only in terms of their wide variety of styles, but wide variety of subject matter. And I think that's something that happens with geniuses. I think that you get bored easily. And I think my grandmother preferred being an impressionist. She was really taken when she visited France and learned about all the French impressionists of the late 19th century. I think that if she had a style, that would be it, where you can actually see the brush strokes when you look up close, but then when you stand back, it looks like a photograph, and there are tricks being played on your mind. She used to talk about that all the time. So I would say she's an impressionist, but then she goes through periods where she's, where the paintings look like photographs from up close and in the back. And then there's some abstract stuff too, just like with Mary, like the hockey scene, and with almost cartoonish figures. So I think that people who have complicated minds, I think same thing with musicians, same thing with poets, I think that they need constant stimulation. So once they master one skill, they need to move on to another skill. And I think that you could see that in both of these rooms.
But they overlap. They incorporated a lot of those things. They never just swept it off the desk and moved on. They kept incorporating.
Evolution, for sure.
So one of the things that we celebrate today is not only the 30th anniversary and not only this wonderful tribute to our history, but at the same time we are introducing the 2014 Legacy Collection in the East Gallery. And these are artists, most of whom are living artists, many of whom are living artists. And so, Fiona, I want to come back to you with a concluding question. But what I want to say is that anyone who's not up here but who has one of these name tags on today is an artist whose work is in the Legacy Collection. So make sure that you put the face with the art. I'd like to say that the catalog that ALDEN has, you are welcome to take with our compliments in honor of the 30th anniversary of the gallery. I'd like to call your attention to the fact that American Art Review, which just came out on Friday, has a 12-page article about this exhibition in it, and also about ALDEN Bryan on Cape Ann, which opens this coming Friday night at Rockport Art Association. Phoebe and ALDEN and I will be down there to represent the home team, and we're thrilled that they have chosen to, they've chosen 35 of ALDEN's pieces to be on exhibition down there from May 10th to June 10th. The clicking that you've heard in the background, we really hope you all were ready for your close-ups, because indeed they did take place. That is Alex Martin from Smugs TV, and he's going to encapsulate this hour's presentation into a 2-minute video that's going to be shown at Smugs TV all summer long. And so if someone tells you they saw you on television, this is where it came from. So now, Fiona, could you conclude with telling us what you, as a living artist, what do you take from this exhibition, these exhibitions?
I would say that just the body of work, keep working. The message I get from these two women is do not be afraid. Be brave, be bold, and do what's in front of you. And keep exploring, which these women obviously have done. I'm honored to be an artist in a world where these women have painted. I would say don't be afraid of size, you know. Get big, that's one of my challenges. It's probably as hard as I think, but it makes a difference. And continue to challenge, continue to challenge yourself. We don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day we'll be up on a wall somewhere. And all by ourselves. And won't that be grand? I would also say, Mary, I wish you had signed more paintings. So sign your work. And just be proud of what you have chosen to do. It's not a hobby. It is a passion as artists, as writers, as poets. And what I see from Mary's show, and what I'm learning from Marian, is that this is their biography. This is their autobiography. We don't have Mary to tell us the stories. We have her children. We don't have your grandmother here to tell us the stories. We have you. And what we learn from these is our autobiography. So keep painting.
Keep the paper trail rolling.
recognize it.
Just thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the Bryan Gallery. It's our pleasure at the Arts Council to do what we can with what little we get. And this is the 30th anniversary exhibition. The state of Vermont, in honor of the Arts Council's 50th anniversary coming up, starting this fall and running through December of 2015, has declared 2015 the year of the arts. And so I sort of see this as kind of a prequel event. I'll be doing a lot of this kind of talking, probably dressed a little better than I am right now, for the next 18 months or so. But it's very important for you to if there's one message I could convey to you about the role of this organization to the state and to its fellow organizations around the state, are the people that are involved with this organization. There are hundreds and thousands of you around the state supporting your particular community's arts activities. And the relationship that you have with this organization is directly related to our ability to fund you. Because if you're not engaged in your community arts organization, it probably means that you're not as invested in its success as you might otherwise be. And if you're not invested in its success, you're not likely to make the connection to your legislator who sits in Montpelier for 5 months out of the year and votes on our budget. So the more you make that connection and realize that there's a direct relationship with your relationship to here, with your legislator, to us, back to you, that's how this ecosystem works. So that I see a lot of these kinds of things that are very familiar to me. Some of the lighting is very familiar to me. I spend more time looking at blank walls than I do at walls with art on them, because we're helping to provide the infrastructure and the sort of catalytic moments that get you involved with an event like this. So this, by the way, is the queen in my opinion.